The time is exactly 8:24 a.m. We're going to be talking with a sociologist and political analyst, and that, of course, is Tessa Dooms, to unpack what exactly is happening in our country, how we can move forward, what it's going to take for us to, I guess, take back our country. Um, gosh, I sit here and think about all the different people we talk to on a daily basis about this very situation. The greatest of minds that come onto the show and talk about the possibilities of this amazing country. But 30 years on, almost 30 years on, it seems that we are sinking into to a very, very dark abyss. But hopefully Tessa can throw some light on the subject and give us some hope. Tessa Dooms, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you on the show. And you are saying South Africans don't agonize, take action. You also go on to say that there is no shortage of people who can articulate its problems, from educated scholars with PhDs to those fighting daily to survive. People across the length and breadth of the country can point to the problems and speak with conviction about their various causes. What's going wrong? Why can't we get it together? What's stopping us from, pulling ourselves up and, flexing our muscles and showing that this can and will work and we will get our country back on track?
So I think that the starting point is that um, what we have in the country right now is a political problem. And I say that because given the dire state of many of the statistics that we speak about all the time, unemployment being as high as it is, one of the highest in the continent, actually in the African continent. We are the most unequal country in the world. Our rates of service delivery are plummeting. So given all of those things, we should be in a much worse situation than we are. But it's actually that communities and people who are doing the daily work of struggle and struggling through their lives are the things that, and their activities and the activities of all of us in different spaces is keeping the country going, right? So we don't have not only a shortage of people who can articulate the issues, we don't have a shortage of people who are showing up for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. So when we talk about unemployment in the country, I always say it's a misnomer because many people who we say are unemployed are actually getting up every day and trying to eke out a living, right? Whether they are walkers on the street or whether people are doing braiding hair or whether they're doing something, they're trying to eke out a living. For many of us, we're working in the social justice sector and we're trying to do work on resistance. There's so many protests in the country. And so people are actually staying plugged in at the level of society and at the level of community to keep things moving. The problem is that we have distanced ourselves from the center of power. We've distanced ourselves from the politics of the country. And we've said that, and I've heard so many times this year in the work we've done with the Rivonia Circle, where people say, we would just like government to leave us alone, get on with the business of our lives. We will figure it out ourselves. And that's become the unspoken truth of our society, is we've decided to distance ourselves from politics, but we have a political problem because it's not their government, whoever they are. It is our government. It's our state. It's our resources. It's our taxes. It's our power that's being misused. And we're not doing anything to reclaim that power. And we have power, but we're not using it to fight the big battle of how do we reclaim state power and how do we make sure that we use all of the resources that we are collectively putting together in the state for all of our benefit.
So, Tessa, we know that we have we have a very corrupt government, and obviously officials throughout government. I don't think, and I'm making a generalization here, there are a few good people out there that are still trying to hold it together in government. What is it that we do? Are they that powerful that we collectively as civil society are unable to topple them? I kind of think of an article I read a few days ago on one of my WhatsApp groups, which suggested there was some sort of a local level elections happening somewhere out in the rural areas. And it was said that the people in the rural areas were given grocery hampers and some alcohol, 6-pack of beer, whatever the case may be. And they were bought over immediately by that action of corrupt government officials just to get their vote. How do we stem all of that? How do we make the people on the ground understand that you need to start thinking about whom you vote into power to serve the people?
So, I mean, there's two parts to that answer. The first is to answer your very last question pointedly. What we refer to as the people on the ground, as people who we think are just apathetic and just mindlessly voting, is not true in South Africa. So what we're seeing is that people are withholding their vote. We're not just seeing people continuing to vote for bad parties or bad politicians. In the last local government elections, the official voter turnout was 45%, right? That was 12 million people. But that was only based on the 26 million people who are registered to vote. There's another 14 million people who are not registered to vote who didn't come out but are over the age of 18. That means only a third of the country who was eligible to vote actually showed up. Because people in their numbers, there are more people who are withholding their vote completely than people who are just mindlessly voting. And
we need those, Tessa, we need those votes, don't we? And we need
Absolutely.
them to vote. We need them to vote practically and intelligently. How do we make it happen?
So a few weeks ago, we had a guest here from the US, from the New Georgia Project. And in Georgia, what they've managed to do in the US, get out 700,000 people who are from marginal communities, who are Black, who are Hispanic, who are from poorer communities, to register to vote for the first time. And just the process of getting those people to register to vote, the difference between Donald Trump winning that election in 2020 and him not winning it. Literally by 12,000 votes in Georgia was the difference. And so we must first take seriously that people need to understand why voting matters and why voting is important. Because people think that by withholding their vote, they're making it more difficult for political parties. It's untrue. The fewer people vote, the better for political parties, because that means only the people that will vote for them will show up. So we must know that we have to raise our voices and we have to participate. But more importantly, we need to start having conversations amongst each other about how we are making our voting choices and what are the issues that we are voting for. And for me, one of the opportunities we have towards 2024 is for all of us as voters and as civil society and as people in business and professionals who usually just wait for election season for the political parties to start the conversation. The political parties create the manifestos and the campaigns and the rallies, and then we wait for them to come and convince us. Instead, we must start working now on each other. We must start working now on convincing each other to vote. We must start working now on coming up with a collective demand that we have of the politicians. We must come up with what we're calling a people's manifesto, where the people of the country determine and decide what the issues for the 2024 election must be. We must decide what the quality of leadership is that any political party who wants our vote must meet that quality of leadership. So one of the conversations I was in this week with young people is the demand that any party who wants young people's vote must commit to 25% of young people going into parliament. That's the kind of thing we can do now, is set our standards for who we are willing to vote for. And the third thing that we can do is we can raise our hands to be voted for. Right now, there's an electoral reform process that's happening to allow independent candidates to contest, but also broaden the scope of who can contest. Too many of us are willing to complain and point fingers at the people who do raise their hands to go into government. but we ourselves are not willing to go through the discomfort of raising our own hands. And so the work that we can do now is to convince each other to participate more fully.
Okay, Tessa, I need to just move the discussion in a slightly different direction. And undoubtedly, you will have very strong views on this issue. Corrupt political parties or the corrupt ANC government. These guys are powerful. They've raped the country of lots of the resources. They've got the power. They've got the backing through all the stolen money. You know, your money and my money. They're sitting with all of our money and they can go to court. Just look at the Jacob Zuma shenanigans. He keeps going to court for a whole host of different reasons. Who's funding his court appearances? It's you and I, ordinary taxpayers. How are we going to be addressing this issue around corrupt officials? The ANC who have not delivered. It looks like every ANC politician, member of parliament that is there are just trying to grab as much of the loot as they possibly can before they lose a grip on the country. Am I being too negative when I articulate those thoughts and those frustrations of mine?
No, not at all. It's certainly true that political parties have gotten very used to being unaccountable about the ways in which they fund their activities and the ways in which they leverage the state to do that, right? So we've seen the ANC doing everything in its power to get back into the leading seats in the Gauteng metros because it's linked to, and the state capture inquiry showed this, the president admitted himself, it's linked to the ability to leverage state resources so that you can do political activities. That's part of the problem. And while we really must raise that issue, we must challenge funders about what they are willing to fund because the funding space in this country is very small. And because of the Political Funding Act, we now know who the funders are. Funders need to declare themselves, and funders need to be willing to also be held accountable for who they're willing to fund and what they're willing to fund. But the big tool that we have, and again, 2024 is not far. The biggest tool that we have is our ability to vote and to contest power in 2024. And whether you do it in a party or whether you do it as an independent, whether you do it as a voter rather than somebody who contests as a candidate, that's the battleground that matters. We can see what's happening in the UK right now. In the UK, we've seen that a Minister of Finance was fired this week for making one bad financial treasury decision. One bad treasury decision, and the public outcry forced the hand of the Prime Minister. And that's also, again, linked to the electoral system. Because the members of parliament, even in the party of the Prime Minister, know that they are directly elected by people in their communities. And those people can put direct pressure on them so that your government can't just do what it wants. And you don't have to wait only for every 5 years. So we must think about, right now, tomorrow, I think it is, or Thursday, our parliament is going to be voting on a bill to change the way we vote. And that bill is actually a really bad bill because it makes the entire election unfair and it doesn't give power to people to directly vote for their members of parliament. Those are the kind of battles we need to fight right now to make sure that we can actually put pressure on the parliamentarians, put pressure on cabinet, and do the work of accountability before elections and after elections. That's the work that needs to get done. We have to be willing to get into the ring. For too long, as a South African public, we've become complacent and comfortable with shouting about what is right, rather than fighting for what is right and accountability and being willing to be the ones who cast a vision for the future.
Okay, the other big problem, and Leah Lynette Rowbury, thank you indeed for becoming a part of the conversation. I will put your questions to our guest in a minute or two, but I just want to get in a question or two in as well. Cadre development, deployment, and cadre protection. That's a big issue we're battling with right now as well. How do we tackle that? And then the other very big question, I mean, you talk with so much of passion, gives me hope hearing you talk as a sociologist and a political analyst. I guess the big question here for us, the people on the street, is the how and the who as far as leading us to make our voices heard. Will we ever be heard? Unless we have a very, very strong leadership ahead of us as civil society. Would you like to respond to those two questions, please?
Sure, and I hate to be a broken record about this electoral reform issue, but it's such a fundamental issue. Because
Right.
parliamentarians are about to vote to change the way that we vote. And they've not even read the bill. Many of them have not read the bill that is about to change the way that we vote. And there's not many of us about changing the way that we vote. And that conversation can give us a lot of power. Because what we don't realize is the voting system that we have now is an accident of history. It was something that was come up in a very short space of time in an emergency crisis situation before 1994. And it was also about the National Party realizing if they allowed for people to vote in constituencies the way we do in the ward system now at local government level, if they allowed people to vote that at that point, no one would vote for white people. They knew that. So we created a party system where only the party gets to deploy and only the party gets to recall in Parliament. And we must change that. If we can change the idea that MP must be directly responsible to the public and accountable to the public, we can change a lot about the way the system works. We can change a lot about something like cadre deployment, because right now, the reason why MPs don't want to be directly voted for in constituencies and in the communities they live in is because they'd rather hide behind the party. And they'd rather do that because many of them are not doing their work or competent. We need to get involved in this electoral reform conversation. We have until December, and we must make sure that we get the kind of voting system that allows for accountability. In terms of the second question, who? Absolutely every one of us know people who we would rather see lead. Absolutely every one of us. I have not spoken to a single South African who can't make a list of 10 people who they would be willing to be represented. And we need to convince each other to raise our hands and convince those amongst us who we know have a track record, who are ethical, to represent us and not to lead us, to represent us, to go and work on our behalf and be willing to be accountable to us. That's what we need. And so I'm very clear about the idea that we're not waiting for some singular messiah. We made that mistake when we did the Mandela moment and we invested all of our political trust into one individual. We cannot do that ever again. We've allowed that culture to come up where now we're just looking for a new number one. Every time we're just cycling, let's see if this one works. Let's see if this one works.
Absolutely. And they're all tainted.
The power is not going to lie in one superhero, because that means we can all rise or fall on one person's failures. We must find a system that devolves power down, where we all have some sort of stake in the politics of the day, where we choose people to represent us. We have the power to hire them and we have the power to fire them. But they must be people who live in our communities, who suffer the issues that we suffer, who experience the things that we experience and are willing to come back and actually engage us directly. It cannot be about waiting for one superhero. Those days are over.
Okay, let's wrap up by taking the two questions from our listener, and that, of course, is Leah Lynette Robury. The first statement is pretty long. I'll read it out, and the second one is short and to the point. Okay, she starts off by saying, "Greetings. Pride, in brackets, in its negative context and prejudice." Okay, they've just put up the message very, very boldly on the screen, so it's going to make it easier for me to read. Pride in its negative context and prejudice keeps us from unity consciousness. Greed and leaders who value the system of capitalism, the love of money, create an unhealthy platform for growth, because capitalism is a very selfish mindset. the system of government in South Africa is a farce. We can start with ballot boxes left on the side of the road. Why can't voting be aired alive? First question. Second one from the same caller, that of course is you, Leah Lynette Robbery. President's inauguration is aired live. Everyone must see. Why can't that technology be utilized for the people? Can't agree with you more. Last but not least, still from Leah. Why? Why must there be only one leader? Why can't we have a president for agriculture, a president for commerce, etc., etc., etc.? I think to answer that question, but we'll allow our guest Tessa to respond as well. I guess that's why we have ministers with these portfolios. But Tessa, your thoughts on all of these questions by Leah Lynette Robbery.
Yeah, I'll start with the last and then go to the first. The last one is that's exactly the reason why we need to focus on this question about how we elect people and who is responsible and accountable to us so that we can put into parliament and we can put into those positions people who are competent on the areas in which they are competent. So at this point, we don't even vote for a president. We vote for parliamentarians. This idea that we vote in a president is untrue, because parliament votes in a president. So our job is to get the right parliamentarians in the room, to vote for the right kinds of people in the executive who will then do the job. And right now, the president we have does not trust his cabinet to run. He doesn't trust his cabinet to do work on unemployment. That's why he has a desk in his office, a project management desk in his office for unemployment. He's moved state security into the presidency because he doesn't trust the very people he's appointed. And we need to appoint better people, not him. We need to get a system that allows us to appoint better people. And that's why I'm saying, even if the system doesn't change before 24, let's set our standards for who we're willing to vote for in terms of parties much higher. The second thing is that question about capitalism. What the country absolutely needs to confront is inequality. We talk a lot about unemployment. We talk a lot about poverty. Both very important things. The thing we are not talking about enough in South Africa is the consequences of inequality. And particularly as Black people, as people who are historically marginalized, who have managed to get into the system and get some level of privilege and benefit from that system. We have to have some very honest conversations about the fact that we're going to have to disrupt our own privileges, some of us, in order to get what I call radical solidarity in this moment. People who have some level of privilege are going to have to extend their privilege to others. That's the bottom line. And a capitalist system requires there to be winners and losers. And in this country, the winners are a very small group of people, and the losers are the majority. So we're going to have to challenge ourselves to create an economy that works for us, best for us. We can't just borrow economic models from other parts of the world and think they're going to work in the most unequal country in the world.
Okay, let me end off with this thought. If not, I mean, I've been hearing quite a few politicians suggesting this, political analysts rather, suggesting that if we're not going to be addressing this problem sooner rather than later, South Africa is going to be ripe, very ripe for an Arab Spring. Your thoughts? A short answer, please.
Yes, South Africa is ripe for an Arab Spring. What we saw in July last year was the tip of the iceberg, and the core behind it is when people feel like they don't own the place that they live in, then they don't care about it enough to preserve it.
Tessa Dooms, an absolute pleasure talking to you, picking your brain, talking about these very issues that are plaguing our lives, our economy, and our country. And as you rightly say, we need to wake up. We need to get the right people into power. We do have the power collectively, but we need to make it happen. Thank you indeed. Hope to have many more conversations with you in the future. God bless.
Thank you.
Leah Lynette Robbery, I have seen your final three remarks as well. You're going to say divide and conquer. I can't agree with you more. You also say humanitarian leaders, not businessmen, is what we need in the country. And you also say, thank you, Tessa, love you. Of course, she is an amazing young woman, is she not? Thank you indeed, Leah, for becoming part of the conversation. It is exactly 8:49 a.m. This is News and Views on Salam Media.